I am spotlighting you, and go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I've been enjoying your stories for these past few months now, but as a rather new member of the church, I don't have much of a history here at First Unitarian. Nevertheless, I'm willing to share my story with you, and the thread I will follow will be to highlight a few of the people and places that have played a role in my spiritual journey that eventually led to the Unitarian Church. The first person who played a major role in influencing the development of my inner life was my father. He had an Irishman's love of stories and poetry, and he did an admirable job of passing that devotion on to me. I remember the exact day it happened because it was my 4th birthday and the same day our family moved into a new home. The house we moved into had an ice cream parlor attached to the side of it, which would become my mother's beauty shop. The new house also meant that my brother and I each had a bed of our own, even though we still had to share a room. That first night, my dad positioned a chair between our 2 new twin beds, and he began what became a nightly ritual of reading us a story from a 2-volume edition of Grimm's Fairy Tales. So from 4 years old until I could read for myself, I went to sleep with visions of giants, fairies, talking animals, and all manner of unusual characters populating my dreams. As I grew older, my dad also shared with me his favorite book, 101 Famous Poems. Later, when I was taking typing in high school, my dad would pay me a dime a page to type out his favorite poems by Thoreau, Whitman, and Wordsworth. He'd fold them up and put them in his pocket to be pulled out later and read when he had a few quiet moments. If you look in my purse, you'll see some poems that are folded up just in case I have a few minutes. My dad died when I was 32, but he left me with a love of literature that has enriched my whole life. My first awakening to anything church-related took place when I was 4.5 years old. At the time, my mother worked all day, 5 days a week in her beauty shop. And so my 6-year-old brother and I were pretty much left to fend for ourselves during the day. Gary would go off with his pals, so I often sat on our front stoop wishing for one of my girlfriends to come by and play with me. One July morning, a neatly dressed lady walked by. Then she stopped and turned to me and said, "Little girl, I've seen you before sitting on that stoop. Why are you here and all alone?" And I told her that I just didn't have anybody to play with. And she responded with an invitation to go with her to Bethel Baptist Summer Bible School. She promised there would be stories, fun crafts, and maybe even treats sometimes. I was happy to join her, so I jumped up from the stoop, took her hand, and off we went. For the next couple of weeks, each morning, I eagerly awaited my new friend. It was at Bible school that I first experienced the magic of the flannel board. Each morning we were told a Bible story while the lady smoothed colorful flannel back characters onto the felt board. The stories really touched my heart. Seeing Jesus feed the hungry people with only 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, watching him make 10 lepers well again, and seeing the Good Samaritan help the poor beaten man lying in the ditch, I was captivated while watching those figures as they were moved about on the board. Those daily Bible stories became a vivid part of my inner life. Although I don't remember her name, the flannel board lady is responsible for my first introduction to the stories that Jesus told his followers. At 5, I entered first grade at St. John's Catholic School, and my whole world changed. My teacher was Sister Mary Brendan. She was kind, young, and beautiful. I immediately wanted to become a nun like Sister Brendan. In the space of a few short months, my imagination was populated by 3 gods in one, an old man, a young man, and a bird, and then multiple choirs of angels and a whole cavalcade of holy saints. It wasn't long before I began playing dress-up by donning one of my mom's black slips as if it were a habit and putting another black half-slip over my head as a veil. Then I would teach religion to my imaginary class. My mother became ill when I was in 4th grade. The doctor told her she would not be able to work long hours 5 days a week. She would have to limit herself to fewer hours and only 2 days a week. So our house with the beauty parlor on the side was sold, and we moved to a brand new house, which was only a few blocks away from Mercyhurst College. This is in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm not sure I remembered to tell you that. When I was in 8th grade, my parents began to discuss where I should go to high school. Even though we were not wealthy, it was important for my mother that I attend Mercyhurst Seminary, which was a high school for girls on the first floor of the main building of Mercyhurst College. The entire student body only numbered 124 young women. Now, Mercyhurst Seminary was known for its excellent education, but the real reason my mother wanted me to attend Mercyhurst was that my friends would be the daughters of well-to-do people, doctors, lawyers, and businessmen. It only followed that I would be invited to their houses and meet their older brothers and thus make a good match. Unfortunately, much to my mother's disappointment, it didn't work out quite the way she had hoped. While I went to all the dances and enjoyed dating and parties, I never got serious about any of my dates. And I became friends with a wealthy girl, but the only other girl in my class who planned to enter the convent. Once we got our driver's license, we would take turns driving one another up to the Carmelite monastery for early morning mass. We took night courses in theology at Gannon University, and we taught catechism at St. Matthew's in the Woods with a group of nuns whose mission it was to educate rural children in their Catholic faith. I have fond memories of several of my teachers at Mercyhurst Seminary, but the person whose influence was the greatest was Sister Mary Bridget. She taught social studies, English, speech, and was the coach of our forensic team, as well as the director of both the fall and the spring school plays. I was especially delighted and honored when she asked me to work with her during one summer while she worked with children on a summer theater workshop. It was a rare chance for me to get to know her in a non-classroom setting. Sister Bridget was a clear thinker who expressed herself with confidence. She had a profound influence on me. It was my first indication of my responsibility to think clearly, to look at both sides of an issue, and to support my position with facts. I didn't realize it then, but Sister Bridget's example laid the groundwork for difficult decisions I would have to make in the future. If a place can be an influence, and I think it can, Mercyhurst College and Seminary played a major role in fostering my inner growth. My high school years were rich in opportunities for spiritual development. I loved having the chapel at the end of the hall, available for prayer and meditation whenever I wanted. Well, whenever I had a free period, I should say. We seminarians were able to use the college biology and chemistry lab, as well as their art studio and stage and auditorium. Our library was the college library, which provided easy access to a vast variety of books, including my favorites, art, philosophy, and theology. I was 13 to 17 during those years, so I'm quite sure I didn't understand most of the meaning of what I was reading, but I certainly loved to be in that library devouring those books. In my senior year, I told my parents of my decision to enter the convent. They were not particularly happy about it, but they agreed to cooperate if I would wait until January, when I turned 18. I knew my dad didn't have the money to send me to college, so I applied to the cadet teacher program at Mercyhurst. It was a program that provided a free education if you were willing to go to school for 2 full years and 5 summers, and then teach your sophomore and your senior year for the sisters in one of their schools. So in June of 1960, right after I graduated high school, I started college and then entered the convent on January 29th of 1961. It was at the Mother House in Titusville, PA, where I met the woman who had the most profound influence on my spiritual development between the ages of 18 and 21. Mother Mary Andre, my mistress of novices. She took her job seriously, but she also had a sense of humor about her as well. Most of our day was spent in silence, attending classes led by Mother Andre about the various aspects of spirituality, about learning the history and the rule of our order. There was time spent in prayer, spiritual reading, chanting the divine office, meditation, and pursuing a life dedicated to doing the works of mercy. And chores, many, many chores that needed doing to keep a house large enough to handle more than 75 people. My mom had used a sponge mop to clean her floors, but I soon learned how to scrub and wax floors on my hands and knees. A secret was passed down from the novices to the postulants that if we put a little ball of Murphy's oil soap under whatever furniture we were told to clean, when our mistress came to check on how well we had performed our chore, she would smell the pungent Murphy's and be reassured that we had done a good job. I loved my life in community. It was a group of dedicated women. Some sisters were scientists, musicians, artists, poets, researchers, nurses, and hospital and college administrators. And there were also many who might not have had advanced degrees, but who generously contributed their hard work and their devotion to our community's goal of service to the poor, sick, and uneducated. Now, that is not to say there weren't a few odd characters. You might call them short-tempered, grumpy, demanding, but by and large, my experience in community was being a part of a group of good women who were dedicated to doing God's work on earth. I'd like to tell you a story about my mistress of novices that shows not only her watchfulness, but also her kindness and sense of humor. Sisters always went out from the convent by twos, and one day my companion and I were sent to the village of Titusville to pick up a prescription at the pharmacy. On the way, we would be expected to keep custody of the eyes. That's not quite the same thing as we think of when we're walking while using our phone and looking down. It's more of a intention not to be distracted by all that was around us. So, okay, I did just fine until we came to a donut shop. Now, I hadn't seen a donut since I entered the convent about 1.5 years before this. And so I just stopped and looked, and my eyes went wide. And there they were, all of these luscious donuts, some frosted, some cream inside. It was glorious. I just couldn't tear my eyes away. So my companion had to remind me to keep custody, which I did. I felt a little disappointed in myself, but I got back into line. And I didn't think much more about it until later that morning. Mother Andre called me into her office and asked me to explain what I understood about our practice of keeping custody of the eyes. Ooh, I got a little nervous. And I tried to answer her as well as I could. And then she said, "Well, Sister Victoria, would that include not looking in the donut shop's window as we passed it?" I knew I had been caught. Then she explained to me that she had been being driven back from the doctor's appointment when she looked out the window, and to her horror, she saw a Sister of Mercy with her eyes and her mouth open wide, just staring at the donut shop's window. Right then, I started worrying about what kind of penance she would dream up. She told me she would talk further with me later. Oh, great, she's giving me time to stew and worry. Anyway, she called me later back to her office, and then she gave me some money. And she said I was to get another companion and go back to the donut shop. And I could not look at the donuts through the window. I had to go into the shop and purchase 24 donuts for the 22 sisters in the novitiate to enjoy at collation that afternoon. It was the easiest penance I ever had to do. It was our custom for the sisters to take turns reading in the refectory from a spiritual book chosen by the Mother Superior. I read well and could be heard throughout the refectory. No little bit of talent goes to waste in the convent, and this rather insignificant talent was the reason I was asked to pursue a master's degree in English and drama. I explained to the Superior General that I had taken a course at Gannon College in teaching children with learning disabilities, and that I was about to ask her if I could use a room at Mercyhurst College that summer to operate a summer school for children with learning disabilities. She approved of my requests, but said she would like me to teach English and speech at Kennedy Christian High School that fall to see if I didn't feel more suited to older students. And she was right. in that I did very much enjoy working with high schoolers in English Lit and coaching their speech teams and preparing them for the forensic competitions. However, I had 3 sophomores who, from their class participation, I gathered were bright enough, but who were failing in English and math and other subjects, mainly because their teachers couldn't read their work. I invited them to stay after school for a few days each week so that they could relearn the correct motor patterns for cursive letters and learn how to set up math papers so their work would be legible. They were all successful in bringing up their grades. And my small experiment convinced me that if I got to kids earlier, the better off they would be. So at the end of that term, I explained to Mother Superior that I was still eager to get my master's in learning disabilities rather than English and drama. She said if I could raise my own money, she would let me go. So I got a student defense loan that could be forgiven 15% per year, and then another interest-free loan from our local LD Parents Group. And in the fall of 1970, I attended Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. During my year away from the community, I continued to attend Mass, recite my office, and meditate. But a change was happening within me. I was reading Hans Küng, Teilhard de Chardin, Edward Schillebeeckx, and I was following the activities of the Berrigan brothers. It became clear to me that the Catholic Church was deeply in error, particularly in their structure of patriarchy, their accumulation of wealth, their refusal to allow the use of contraceptives, and their disregard of women. I came to the conclusion that I would no longer accept the authority of the Pope over the moral decisions that I made. That past September, I had started Lesley with dreams of returning to create a learning disability clinic at Mercyhurst that might even eventually lead to a special education degree program. But by December, I knew I would need to request an indult of secularization from the Pope. As much as I loved my community and wanted to remain a part of it, I knew I would have to leave. When I returned to the Mother House at Christmas, I told Mother Superior of my decision. She told me that she understood completely and gave me the forms to fill out that would need to be sent to the Pope. Little did I know then that she was contemplating doing the same, very same thing shortly thereafter. My indult of secularization arrived in April of 1971. I was 28 when I left the convent. My summers were spent as supervisor of tutors at Pine Ridge School for learning disabled adolescents in Williston, Vermont. And I was hired as a director of education of the Sarah Reed Children's Center in Erie, which was a residential treatment center for children with emotional and learning problems. Being 28 and trying to meet eligible men was quite a challenge. My colleagues suggested I go to singles bars. It was a great place to meet men. You can imagine how I felt when I walked into these bars with my A-line skirt and my Peter Pan collar. Seeing so many young women in short shorts and bare midriffs. All I really wanted from a date was an evening of interesting conversation. But all I got was talk of sports. I knew I'd need some assistance in this matter. So I asked our psychologist at Sarah Reed, who also worked at Gannon University, if he knew anyone at Gannon that I might have an evening's interesting conversation with. He said he wasn't sure, but he promised to look around. The next week he came back and told me he had thought of someone I might enjoy conversing with. And this was Jim Palmer, the department head of electrical engineering. Frank assured me that he was the most humane engineer Frank knew. He was older than me, was reasonably good looking, and he might be interested in taking me out. His wife had died suddenly about 1.5 years ago, and he had recently begun to date. But Frank warned me there was one drawback. "What's that?" I asked Frank. He said, "Well, he has 7 children." After my initial shock, I said my famous last words. "Oh, Frank, all I'm asking for is one evening's nice conversation. I'll take a chance. Please give him my number." We had our first date in September and continued to date through October. Early in November, Jim suggested that I meet his children. He asked me to come by the house around 6 o'clock, as he should be home from school by then. We could spend some time with the kids and then go out to dinner. I was really nervous. Now, this is somebody who was running a residential school for difficult children, and I was nervous to meet these kids. He said he couldn't think of any reason he wouldn't be home by 6 and not to worry about it. When I rang the doorbell, I didn't see Jim. I was met with a chorus of kids saying, "Dad just called. He's going to be late. He has to have his headlight fixed. But you can come down to the rec room with us." So I went in, not knowing what was in store. Mostly it was calls for my attention from every corner of the room. "Mary, look at this bar. I helped my dad build it. Mary, listen to me play the piano. Mary, can you catch this ball? Mary, look what I can do. Mary, are you going to be our next mommy?" By the time Jim joined us, my head was spinning. 3 months later, in February of '74, Jim was offered the department head position of electrical engineering at RIT. Now, I thought the world of this man. He was just simple, good, and just thoroughly at one with himself and kind and had a sense of responsibility. I knew, though, that a long-distance relationship with the father of 7 would never work. So I tried to prepare myself to be dumped. When one evening in March, he said to me, "Mary, I don't want you to say anything right now, but have you ever thought of getting married?" I was stunned, as I never expected this. Some of you might know that engineers are not very forthcoming with their feelings sometimes. So I didn't know that he cared that much about me. Then he said, "Don't answer yet. How about I come over after the kids are in bed every night next week? Each night we'll talk about one topic. like raising kids, money, religion, anything else you think we should discuss. I could hardly speak, but managed to agree with his plan. The following week, we discussed every aspect related to marriage we could think of. On Friday, after our discussion, Jim said, "Well, it seems as if we agree on all of the essentials." I said, "Yes, I think we do." And then I waited for the big question, but it didn't come. And I thought to myself, well, Mary Margaret, you really love this man. If you want to marry him, you're going to have to do something. So I turned to him and put out my hand and said, "Shall we shake on it?" Which we did. We were married that May and moved to Rochester in June. Jim was with RIT and I got a job teaching special education in Rush Henrietta, so I would have roughly the same schedule as the kids. Jim's children were a great bunch. The older girls had learned how to cook and sew from their mom, and all of the kids helped out around the house. I was definitely no Maria von Trapp. The hardest part for me of having 7 children was not the children. It was the noise level. After living in the convent for 10 years, then by myself for nearly 3 years, having a house full of kids with their record players going, chatting on the phone, taking multiple showers, blow drying their hair, and just playing and talking like kids do. It made me long for a bit of quiet. I had to acknowledge that serenity and quiet were no longer a part of my environment, and I was the one who had to get used to a different ambiance. Surprise, you don't need the convent to have the hard edges filed on your character. Cleanliness and organization were my hallmarks, and I had to give in on a lot of that. When I asked a wise friend what I could do to encourage these kids to pick up after themselves, she asked me if I wanted my relationship with them to be all about their messiness, or if I wanted it to be about getting to know them and learning to love them. Put that way, I didn't need to think very long before I changed my standards. And I told the kids that the things they played with in the living room would have to be picked up when they were done. But upstairs, they could just keep their bedroom doors closed. The years with a house full of kids were filled with noise, laughter, and yes, some angry outbursts and some tears. There were holidays and birthdays, picnics at Stony Brook and Letchworth, graduations, and then weddings and christenings. It was a full house and a full life. Today, I have 15 marvelous grandchildren and 6 of the world's most adorable great-grandchildren. By the time the 3 oldest of our children left the nest, Jim and I began to volunteer at Isaiah House Hospice from the mid-'80s to 2000, when we both retired. Then we went our separate ways to volunteer, Jim to Meals on Wheels, and I went to One World Goods and St. Joseph's Neighborhood Center, as well as tutoring in the city schools. For many years, I had been a member of an anthroposophical study group who read and discussed the works of Rudolf Steiner. There were interesting and lovely people in this group, but even though we came together to study and to celebrate some of the festivals, we never really became a community. And community was something I was still searching for. I knew I could continue volunteering by myself, and that would certainly be worthwhile. But I longed for a group to be a part of. I also knew I was getting older and was not as efficient and able as I once was. But I felt I could still contribute some small bit if I were part of a larger group. In 2014, I visited First Unitarian for an art exhibit. I picked up a couple of pamphlets in which the message seemed very compatible with my own thinking. So I thought I'd try it for a while. I attended without joining for about a year before I realized I had found my home. But it seemed as soon as I signed the book, the whole community began to implode. And I wondered if I should bail out. But after some deep thought, I decided that I had joined for good and valid reasons, and it made sense for me to stick with my decision and stick with my community. I am very glad I stayed. My participation expanded to joining both Soul Matters and Wellspring. And I feel so blessed that I can continue to do my small part for RAIN and for the school partnership and support the mission of our church. In 2015, my husband Jim died after a long struggle with Parkinson's. And I will always be grateful for the compassion and support my family and I received at that time. To those of you who have been building this community over decades, you did a phenomenal job, and I give you my heartfelt thanks. And to any newer members, thank you too for joining with us and adding your energy and gifts to making our community even stronger and more effective. Thank you.